Welcome to the Emergency Response to Railroad Incident Training Program. During the next hour, a lot of information about our railroad will be presented to you. The topics covered will include railroad incident safety as well as emergency response procedures. You'll also learn about the hazardous materials that travel along the rails and the equipment we use to move them. While CSX Transportation provides this and other training programs to emergency responders in the many communities in which we operate, I expect that many of you never have and most likely never will need to respond to a railroad hazardous material incident. This is a good thing, and there's a reason why. Each year, over 99.9% of them reach their intended destination without incident. And when we do encounter a problem with a hazmat rail car, it usually involves something as simple as a loose manway cover bolt or a partially open valve. While this program is not intended to teach you how to repair tank cars, it is designed to give you the critical information you need to help manage a railroad emergency effectively and most of all safely. We hope you find the next hour informative and even entertaining, and that you'll come away with a greater knowledge and appreciation of railroad emergency response and CSX Transportation's commitment to safety.
Regardless of whether you are near the tracks due to a railroad emergency or some other type of incident that happens to be near the railroad, you should make contact with the railroad personnel prior to commencing work. You can contact the CSX Police Communications Center at 1-800-232-0144 and request that they hold rail traffic, or you may contact local CSX personnel who are near the scene. The placement of lookouts down the track is not sufficient to protect responders who are near the tracks unless you first call CSX and notify us of your activities. A basic safety rule says expect movement on any track in any direction at any time. This is good advice. Never assume the rails are clear unless you have been notified that they are by a responsible railroad official. Even trains that have been sitting for an extended period may move unexpectedly at any time. Never assume that railroad equipment will remain in one place unless you are told so by a responsible CSX official. Do not walk between the rails, except under the circumstances that there is no other option available. While the railroad track may look like an inviting walkway, in reality, rail equipment can move unexpectedly in your area and approach you from behind. Responders should walk to the side of the rail and keep the area between the rails clear. When in the rail yards around the railroad tracks, watch where you step at all times. Tripping hazards are commonplace in rail yards and at derailments. Uneven walking surfaces and debris can be found that present hazards to responders. The best advice to responders around rail equipment is for your feet never to go anywhere that your eyes haven't gone first. Personal protective equipment must be worn at all times. Eye protection, head protection, steel-toed boots or firefighter's boots, and good leather working gloves must be worn to protect against the common hazards found in railroad emergency response. Responders should be aware of the electrical hazards associated with locomotives. Locomotives can generate anywhere from 600 to 23,000 volts of electricity. Locomotives can become energized in incidents. Emergency fuel cutoffs will not cut off the electrical power. Be sure that you treat locomotives as if they are energized pieces of electrical equipment. Even though it may seem like a basic safety rule, always look in both directions before stepping across or getting close to railroad tracks. This is especially true where there are multiple sets of tracks and where equipment can move in both directions. Keep a safe distance, at least 30 feet from passing trains and equipment. If during the course of responding to an incident, response personnel have to move inside 30 feet to the railroad tracks, please contact CSX Police Communications Center at 1-800-232-0144. Never place anything on the track unless it's required to do so for a specific emergency response task. Tools and equipment should be placed on the side of the railroad track so that they are out of the way of moving equipment. Always leave 25 feet between you and any standing rail car when crossing tracks. Rail cars can move without warning, and you want to give yourself a fair amount of room to get away in case a car starts to move as you cross. Always face the direction from which a train is traveling. Just keep in mind, what is past you can't hurt you. What's coming at you potentially can. If your response activities require that you run a hose line across the tracks for an extended period of time, it is advisable to run the hose line underneath the tracks and dig out the rail ballast by hand. When you complete your response activities, ensure the rail line is clear of traffic before removing hoses, and replace the ballast between the cross ties. If response activities require that you work on or around rail equipment, make sure that handbrakes are set and wheels are chocked before you climb on that equipment. Doing so can prevent sudden movement by the rail cars. When working on rail equipment in a rail yard, safety devices known as blue flags and locks are used to prevent moving equipment from inadvertently moving onto the track where you are working. Railroad personnel install these safeguards for your protection, and you should check with a CSX representative on the scene of an incident to ensure the track protection is in place. Keep in mind that blue flags and locks may protect the track on which you are working, but may not prevent movement on adjacent tracks. Always use the safety handles, platforms, and ladders that are provided. Maintain 3 points of contact. Climb slowly and deliberately onto rail equipment. Never jump off a rail car. Use the ladder to climb down and face the equipment when climbing. Never stand, step, or cross on the center sill or coupler between rail cars. Any sudden movement can throw you between the rail cars. Intermodal containers and boxcars present special hazards to emergency responders. Before you open any door, make sure you know the direction it's intended to open and how to open it. Inspect the door and make sure that it hasn't been damaged by fire or by the impact. Doors on boxcars are heavy, and if they fall off, they can cause injury or even death. When working on tank cars, make sure that you have positively identified the contents of the car and understand all of the properties and hazards associated with the material. Detection clues such as placards, the size and shape of the container, the chemical name that may be stenciled, and the proper shipping information on paperwork should all be used to identify the contents of the rail car. Know and understand the valves or relief devices and mechanical features of tank cars and how they operate. There are a number of valves and fittings associated with loading and unloading of rail cars. Each of these valves and fittings has its own unique repair procedure. If you don't know the purpose of a valve or fitting or how to repair it, it's best to isolate the car and wait for trained railroad response personnel to make a repair. If your response activities require that you climb on or off leaking or damaged tank cars, use your own ladder. Climbing on and off rail cars under normal circumstances presents unique hazards. Climbing on and off rail cars that have been damaged or are leaking while wearing protective equipment presents an even greater hazard. By using your ladder, you can reduce the risk of climbing on and off the car. Never put any part of your body in front of any valve, gauge, or other opening on a rail car. Fittings such as slip tube gauging devices can move unexpectedly, striking you and causing injury. Stalled vehicles and emergencies involving motor vehicles at railroad crossings present unique hazards to emergency responders. It is imperative that CSX be notified immediately any time a stalled vehicle blocks a railroad crossing, or another type of emergency exists that may impact the railroad. Signs are mounted at each CSX highway grade crossing that show the grade crossing ID number, the milepost, and the telephone number of the CSX Police Communications Center in Jacksonville. Response personnel should call this number anytime there is a stalled vehicle on a crossing, an accident at or near a crossing, or any event which is taking place at close clearance where train traffic may be a safety issue. If a CSX train needs to be stopped, please remain on the line with the Police Communications Center specialist until you are sure that this is accomplished. This is important for your safety and the safety of our railroad crews. In this section, we have covered basic safety rules for working around rail equipment and responding to railroad emergencies. Remember to expect movement on any track at any time. Use care when walking on railroad property or climbing on rail equipment. Wear the proper protective equipment and contact the CSX Police Communications Center for stalled vehicles or blocked crossings. In the next section, we will discuss initial response procedures. Effective incident management can be enhanced through pre-planning. This is especially true for rail incidents. You should be familiar with railroad facilities in your jurisdiction. A good first step is to contact the railroad personnel in your area and arrange a tour of the facilities. When meeting with CSX personnel, a few basic questions you should ask will assist in your pre-planning efforts. First, are there any terminals or yards in your area? Terminals and yards have a greater concentration of hazmat cars at any given time. Although rail hazmat releases are rare, incidents are more likely to occur in rail yards than on mainline track due to the number of rail cars present. Next, how do you gain access to the yard? Are entrances posted with designations for responders? Are some roads frequently blocked? These questions will help you pre-plan access routes for your personnel. Are there any bridges, trestles, or tunnels in the area? Bridges, trestles, and tunnels can be difficult to access and present special hazards to responders. Bridges and trestles usually span water or roadways, presenting a special risk in the event of a spill. Bridges are usually narrow and do not provide access for motor vehicles. Rail bridges with pedestrian walkways do not provide sufficient room for walking while a train is on the bridge. Responders wishing to work on a rail bridge must secure permission to do so prior to beginning work. Emergencies in rail tunnels are among the most difficult to cope with due to limited space, poor visibility, and a lack of ventilation. Permission from the controlling railroad must be secured before entering a railroad tunnel. Responders should not enter rail tunnels without a railroad representative present. Are there environmentally sensitive areas near the railroad? Wetlands and waterways near a rail incident will need to be protected. Are there any pipelines or communication lines buried along the tracks? CSX leases much of its right-of-way to pipeline or fiber optic communication companies. In the event of an incident, the location of these underground utilities must be determined prior to excavating. Finally, you should know what companies operate the tracks in your area. It is possible for a jurisdiction to have multiple rail lines owned by different companies. It can be difficult to determine ownership during an incident. There are a number of railroad personnel who are involved in response to railroad incidents. These personnel have distinct roles in safely mitigating incidents. Let's meet some of the members of the CSX team. Most trains run with a crew of 2 personnel, an engineer and a conductor. The engineer controls all train movements. The conductor manages the train switching procedures. The conductor is responsible for maintaining the shipping papers for the train. The transportation department manages the movement of rail cars and trains. Transportation managers are called train masters. They respond to assist in clearing undamaged rail equipment from the site and control train movements during clearing operations. Train masters can also assist you with reading and interpreting rail paperwork and can provide you with extra copies if needed. The mechanical department inspects and performs repairs to moving equipment such as rail cars and locomotives. The mechanical foreman responds to oversee wreck clearing and re-railing operations. The mechanical foreman also oversees wreck clearing contractors that respond with heavy equipment. The engineering department maintains tracks, switches, and signals. The roadmaster heads up the field engineering team. Roadmasters can be helpful to responders because they know the area around the track, and they can help identify access routes or potential environmental hazards. The Hazmat Service Support Desk, manned at the Police Communications Center in Jacksonville, can assist you in early incident assessment and decision-making. Field managers respond to incidents and work with local, state, and federal agencies to safely bring incidents to closure. CSX maintains a network of emergency response contractors Available for response to hazardous materials incidents. All CSX contractors are pre-qualified and meet CSX standards for training, equipment, and experience. In addition to dedicated CSX hazmat resources, a number of CSX managers volunteer as hazmat sentinels. These personnel receive advanced rail hazmat response training at the Transportation Technology Center in Pueblo, Colorado, and they receive refresher training annually. CSX sentinels have the capability to repair minor leaks and assist responders in assessing incidents. Other CSX personnel that may respond and assist in incident management include railroad police special agents who can assist with cargo and site security, general claims personnel who assist the public in the event of evacuations or private property damage, corporate communications personnel who can assist your public information officer, and freight claims personnel who manage non-hazardous materials. With the number of personnel who typically respond to a rail incident and the variety of activities associated with mitigating the incident, a unified command structure is recommended. The Senior Transportation Officer for CSX assumes the role of CSX Incident Manager and folds into your unified command structure. In the event of a rail hazmat incident, first responders should take actions to determine if hazardous materials are involved. A number of detection clues point toward the presence of hazardous materials. Placards and markings on hazmat cars. The product name may be stenciled on the car. The tank shape and configuration may point to a specific commodity. The car initial and number can be used to research the contents of the car if no other markings are present. The shipping papers can be consulted to find out what products are in individual cars. Once the presence of hazardous materials has been determined, appropriate protective action must be taken. A good first step is to isolate and deny entry into the scene by the general public. Defensive actions such as product containment and protection of waterways are essential in limiting the spread of contaminants. It is imperative that the response team make contact with the CSX Hazmat Support Desk as early in an incident as possible. CSX Hazmat personnel can provide guidance on response actions to on-site incident managers, and on-site personnel can provide important information about the incident to CSX, so the appropriate resources can be dispatched. In order to determine the extent of damage to hazmat containers, a damage assessment should be performed. Early assessments can be made from a distance. However, a detailed assessment will need to be made by trained CSX personnel and responders. The CSX train documents or consist will be in the possession of the train conductor. In the early stages of an incident, it is imperative that you make contact with this person and ask to see the documents. The conductor can show you the consist and explain the document to you and help determine what materials are involved in the incident. When hazardous materials are present in a train, the CSX train consist contains 4 sections: a tonnage graph, a position and train document, a train listing and hazardous material description, and hazardous special handling instructions. This section is intended to assist the engineer in assessing the layout of his or her train for proper train handling. The tonnage graph lists each car in the train by initial and number. Note that locomotives do not count in the order. Cars containing hazardous materials will be designated with the letter H on the graph. The product identification number will also be listed for the commodity in the car. Cars not containing hazardous materials will be designated with stars on the graph. The number of stars or H's on the graph shows whether the car is loaded or empty. A loaded car may weigh over 100 tons, while an empty car may weigh around 40 tons. Finally, you will see the train ID number on the tonnage graph. The train ID number is important to have when you talk to the CSX Hazmat Support Desk. The position and train document, called a CT-168 report, is a tool for the conductor to use for tracking the accurate position of each hazmat car in the train. This report lists each hazmat car in the train by car initial and number in order from front to rear. The report shows whether the cars are loaded or empty. It gives the car's UN number and the initial position in the train. Since many of our trains set off and pick up cars between major yards, Revision lines are provided to allow the conductor to update the report as changes are made. For example, if this train picked up 5 cars en route, the conductor would line out the initial position and revise the position of each car by adding 5 cars. The train listing and hazardous material description section of the consist shows special information for each car in the train. The cars are listed in order from front to rear. In this consist, the first 5 cars are not hauling hazardous materials. The 6th car is a residue car of hazardous materials. Certain information is provided concerning the material. To the right of the car initial and number is an E, designating that the car is an empty car. To the right of the hazmat notification box is the shipping description of the material. The 7th car is a loaded tank car of sodium hydroxide solution. The hazard class for sodium hydroxide is 8, which means it's corrosive. The letters PG indicate the packing group for the material. The packing group can help the incident manager determine risk for the material involved. A packing group 1 indicates a high risk, a packing group 2 indicates medium risk, and a packing group 3 indicates low risk. The RQ designation means that should a certain quantity of this material be spilled from its container, a report must be made to certain regulatory agencies. The emergency telephone number for the shipper is included below the shipping description, along with the shipper and receiving company names and locations. For further information, consult 49 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 174. This listing continues for all cars in the train. The final section of the consist is the Hazardous Special Handling Instructions. In the event of an incident, the conductor can give this section of the paperwork to you to use in incident management activities. This section contains emergency handling precautions for each hazardous material in the train. This page is specific for sodium hydroxide solution. Notice there are 4 cars in the train that contain the compound. Sodium hydroxide solution is a corrosive material and an environmentally hazardous substance with a reportable quantity of 1,000 pounds. Some basic information about the material is given, along with the following specific instructions. What to do if the material is involved in a fire. What to do if the material is not on fire but simply spilled. What types of personal protective equipment should be used. What environmental considerations should be made, and first aid procedures for personnel exposure. These handling instructions can provide you with the basic information you need in the initial stages of the incident. However, you should make contact with CSX Hazmat through the Police Communications Center as soon as possible. All CSX shipping documents are available to be faxed or otherwise provided to responders in the field. Individual cars in rail yards are not yet part of a train, so no consist is available. A waybill is the shipping document for a single rail car and can be printed out in an emergency. The waybill gives the basic information such as the shipper and receiver, chemical name, hazard class, packing group, and emergency phone number. In this section, we have covered initial response procedures for rail incidents, including pre-planning for rail incidents, railroad personnel who might respond to an emergency, and the documents carried on trains hauling hazardous materials. The next section will cover the types of hazardous materials shipped by rail. Now that you understand railroad paperwork and personnel roles, let's talk about rail hazardous materials shipments. Hazardous materials may move in all types of containers, including tank cars, hopper cars, box cars, gondolas, and intermodal trailers and containers. U.S. and Canadian transportation regulations dictate what type of container is acceptable for each product. All hazardous materials transported by rail fall into one of 9 recognized hazard classes. The hazard class of a material can be identified by the type of placard or the hazard class number. This number can be found at the bottom of a placard or in the shipping description of the consist. Many of the 9 hazard classes are broken down into divisions to assist responders in risk analysis. The hazard classes are summarized as follows. Class 1 materials are explosives. The class is divided into 6 divisions, with Division 1.1 being the most hazardous and Division 1.6 being the least. Incidents involving explosives should be handled carefully by responders, especially if there is fire present. No explosive materials are among the top 25 hazardous commodities transported by rail. Class 2 materials are compressed gases, including Division 2.1 flammable gases, Division 2.2 non-flammable gases, and Division 2.3 poison gases. All of these commodities present a hazard due to the pressure inside the container generated by the compressed gas. Common compressed gases shipping by rail include propane, liquefied petroleum gas, vinyl chloride, butadiene, anhydrous ammonia, carbon dioxide, and chlorine. Class 3 materials are flammable and combustible liquids.